And welcome back. Since the tragic events of 9/11, the Muslim community has often found itself at the center of public scrutiny, grappling with misconceptions as well as stereotypes, overshadowing the true essence of its identity and contributions to society. However, amidst the challenges, organizations like the Muslim Community Network have emerged, dedicating to reshaping perceptions and fostering a more inclusive society. And joining me now is the executive director of the Muslim Community Network. We've got Husein Yatabarry, and we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate having you. So listen, when we talk about this, it's kind of, the word I want to say is it's kind of frustrating in some areas, right? Because I feel like at a certain juncture, we should be better than this.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, obviously, the Muslim community is a large community. I mean, New York City alone, it's a population of 1 million now, out of like so 10% of the city population. But the media narratives and the spin that's been out around the Muslim community since 9/11, or even before that, when you had movies with like Jean-Claude Van Damme or Steven Seagal, and they was always fighting the brown or black and brown Muslim from across the waters. So that kind of elevated during 9/11, and then the past president, Muslim ban, then you have now October 7th happen. So in each era, the animus around Muslims just continues to intensify.
Right. For yourself, talk to me about looking at 9/11. You looked at 9/11. We already knew there were challenges. You said that were pre-existing. But then afterwards, the stereotyping, the bias, the hate, and we look at where we are today, how far have we traveled?
We thought that we were making some strides. So after 9/11, it was a very difficult time for the Muslim community. You have to really understand, even my name being Hussein, and in 2003, America goes to war against Iraq, against Saddam Hussein. So I'm the butt of jokes at school. Like it just makes you feel demeaning. And then you have people just talking down upon your religion because people assume you to be violent, assume for you to be standing for terroristic ideals when that's not the fact. When you actually come from a faith of peace that may have been co-opted by certain actors, but overall, there's almost 2 billion Muslims across the planet. 99.99% of them do not want violence, want to live in peace, want prosperity for their families. But that hasn't been the case. I feel like this nation and this city made a lot of strides since that early 9/11 time period. But then we've had certain time points, I would say in 2016 and now, and since 2023 and October 7th, we've kind of taken 3 steps back.
Right. Well, that last guy didn't make life any easier.
Not at all, not at all. Not for the Muslim community, not for immigrant communities in general.
So when we talk about this, we look at, there's this extremism that we know that exists. And we know, we talk about, bin Laden, we talk about all the stuff, Saddam Hussein, we could go all there. Those are really extremists. But then on the other side, you got the average, hardworking, loving Muslim, and the two become conflated.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is conflating political ideology with religion. Overwhelmingly, most Muslims are practicing a peaceful religion of Islam. Right now, we're in the month of Ramadan where we're fasting for 29 to 30 days. But when you talk about political ideology, you talk about land and boundaries and who governs what domain. That's when you get into the problem of this fascism in some places, and also terrorist ideals, where it's really political ideology, and it's like people having these ideas and they feel like other ideas by the West or other actors may be imposed upon them. So people really need to separate that. It's not Islam that's driving these people. It's their own political ideology and whatever malintent that they have. So let's separate that from the religion, because in every religion we have bad actors.
Right.
So let's not kind of conflate those things.
So when we talk about education and awareness,
Yes.
that's where you call in, right?
Yes.
We got to educate the community.
Of
We have to
course.
also educate the, sometimes even our very own community.
Yeah.
How's that working?
So it's sad that we've had an increase in engagement from schools and external partners over the past 6 months. But at Muslim Community Network, we do a lot of diversity education work with school communities, with corporations. We've been at high schools. We actually have a high school event next week in Brooklyn where we go into the Muslim American experience. Who are Muslims? The true and accurate depiction of Islam, just to kind of shed light, because you have peers, you have coworkers, you have family members, you have neighbors that happen to be Muslim, and people have lived with these people for years, and that narrative that's being painted of being terroristic or being violent, you know that not to be the case. You live amongst them, but understanding more about them will help you dispel some of these myths and some of these rumors and some of these flat out lies about Muslims.
One thing that doesn't go away is the hate crimes. They continue, and unfortunately, they're painful.
Yeah.
And every time you see one, talk to me about, first of all, your reaction when you see here, particularly in the Muslim community, another hate crime.
Oh, it hurts. It hurts a lot. When you think about the Muslim community, you talk about a very strong Black and African community, but you also talk about a largely immigrant community when you talk about New York City. Xenophobia is also then mixed with Islamophobia, and it's like a recipe for disaster, where you even have people that are not Muslims, like Sikhs, who wear turbans, get mistaken for Muslims when there's always some anti-Muslim sentiment in the city or across the world. The huge issue with that is people don't really have the education or awareness as to who Muslims are, so whenever something happens 3,000 miles away, it just blankly gets kind of glazed over all Muslims in our city, and it's really sad and it's really disheartening, because you always think we're in America, the country of ideals, of liberty, of like understanding and freedoms, but then you still have a group of people, I'm talking about 1 million New Yorkers, who do feel scared, who do have fear. Whenever something happens that's on the global news, as a Muslim, you know it may affect you here, because someone may co-opt that and say, hey, it's time to get these Muslims out of my neighborhood, or get these Muslims out of our city or out of our country. And you hear it a lot in the South. You hear less of it in New York, but it's still there in some pockets.
Right. I want to talk about when we are out there on the street, right? And you're walking the street and you're looking around and you're saying, okay, I can see better in terms of population. More and more people are here.
Yeah.
It's a more diverse neighborhood.
Yeah.
But yet, and still, while it's a more diverse neighborhood, there's still this need for diversity education, right? That you would think with more people, things would sometimes be better. But with my boots on the ground and the people that I talk to, they say, listen, when it comes to issues of, diversity education, when it comes to issues of awareness of these critical areas of, of race and religion, people are still stuck in the sand. How do you see it?
I think you're right, and I think it really starts from educations in schools. So Muslim Community Network, we're actually working with Councilwoman Shahana Hanif to introduce a resolution, 0095, which is going to introduce religious diversity curriculums into New York City public schools. It calls on the New York City public school system to work with faith-based organizations, not just Muslims, but Jewish, Christian, Catholic, Sikh. It doesn't matter if your kids are in schools. I think everyone should get a little taste and a little glimpse into how people practice these religions within the city. What are some of the markers? What are some of the symbols? How is some ways that you can talk to your neighbors, like when it's their celebratory moments? And it also provides religious professional development for teachers, for staff, so that they can actually learn more about their students and families as well. I think with this comprehensive look into religious diversity education in schools, you'll start from the youngest, but you really kind of nurture an inclusive society where people really have an understanding from K through 12 of, oh, that's my friend Husein. He celebrates Ramadan. I'm gonna say Ramadan Mubarak. When it's my friend's birthday, when it's my friend's birthday, when it's my friend's holiday of Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, I know why they're doing it. I know some of the phrases to say to them when it's their time of year, but it really builds that inclusivity from young, and I think that's where we really need to start. Sometimes trying to change and adjust adults is very difficult work. A lot of adults are ingrained in certain ideologies, but if we can kind of start that process in the schools, that's where we really got to hit home.
Yeah, these city streets can be mean.
Yeah.
What's your take on city streets today in terms of the climate?
So city streets, when you look at stats, you see like overall, obviously there is crime reduction in a lot of different categories, but obviously the sentiment, people don't feel safe.
Right.
People don't feel safe for a number of reasons, and a lot of it has been attributed to the migrant crisis. Let's just keep it 1,000. People see black and brown migrants coming into the city, and and there's been some very notable cases of migrant violence towards citizens of New York.
Right.
But overwhelmingly, when you look at crime, majority of crime are conducted by citizens of New York that have been here for long periods of time. So it's just like a real understanding of just the sentiment that people are feeling, because there's just so much media and so much social media that shows negativity and that shows the overwhelming violence, that you don't really see the positives that's being contributed by Muslim communities, immigrant communities, black and brown communities. That's not highlighted as much. Shows like this really kind of showcase the work that's being done in the social justice field by black and brown people, but oftentimes it's a lot of those negative depictions because that's what's good for the evening news.
Yeah, well, the reason I asked you about what your take on the climate is because there is this general consensus that the media narrative puts out, which is basically, we'll use it as a thermometer, for example.
Yes.
They set a thermometer as to what they see.
Of course.
But the reality is we see something totally different
Yeah.
than what the thermometer actually reads,
Yeah.
And I was trying to get to your perspective because I think so many times the thermometer, when it comes to the issues of the Muslim community, is already set.
Yes.
Right? And the reality is I'm seeing something totally different.
Yeah.
So when you say about seeing something totally different, for yourself, what is it that you want people to know in this season who have been paying attention to the thermometer and reading it as such, but you got a different reading?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, I go back to it, 1 million Muslims in New York City. You have 100,000 Muslim students in New York City public school systems. You're talking about 10% of the health force field are all Muslims. You're talking about 400 plus mosques in the city as of 2024. So you're talking about overwhelmingly Muslims have been in the city contributing, really giving all they can in a positive manner back to the city, because we see everyone as neighbors, as our allies, as our friends, our brothers and our sisters. But obviously in this month of Ramadan, for Muslims is really, really hard. It's been really hard to practice, especially when you look at media. You see things that are happening across the seas in Palestine. You see just the impact and brutality that Muslims are facing across the world, whether it's Sudan, it's Palestine, and other places. You have Muslims in Congo that are really affected by a lot of violence. And it's really, really sad that we want the powers that be to call for ceasefire in a lot of these conflicts. We want the powers that be to really kind of speak up for Muslims and speak up for us and say, hey, Muslims contribute so much to us. We need to make sure that we're contributing and giving back to them in this city, in this country, but across the world. But I don't really get a lot of that from political powers.
Let's be clear, you are calling for a ceasefire.
Yes, I'm calling for a ceasefire wholeheartedly. Not a humanitarian pause, but a ceasefire. You have 2 million people displaced, 30,000 people killed. In the Palestinian side, you have 1,400 Israelis killed. It's just way too much violence. It has to end. It has to end sometime so that we could talk about some long-term solutions. But there's people that's in the rubble of Gaza that this Ramadan, they don't have food to break their fast with. You have a family that's sharing one loaf of bread together to break fast. That's not the way we should operate in this world. Not when we call ourselves the defenders of freedom and democracy. It doesn't look like that to me right now.
How do people get a better understanding of the Islam-Muslim experience?
I think subtle ways you can start is by talking to Muslims that you know, just around you, in your building, on your street, in your schools, in your workplace. I guarantee you there's a Muslim that lives somewhere near you. Talking to them and just kind of getting their perspective, because we're also not a monolith. I'm a Gambian Muslim. There's Arab Muslims. There are Latino Muslims. That's the fastest growing population of Muslims. There's South Asians. So we all have our cultures that's intertwined with our religion, and it's we all have very different, unique outlooks on what Islam is. We all believe in Allah. We all pray to Allah, but our culture is really infused. You come to the West African culture, you come to our parties, we're dancing, we're having fun. You may go to a different culture's version of Islam. Maybe it's like a little bit more serious, less music. Then you might go all out. You go, man, I've been around some Albanians and they party hard.
Right.
And it's just like, but that's the beauty of it. It's really a mosaic.
Right. As people get to learn more about the Muslim community, one of the things I think is, is the most important is just the education piece per se, right?
Yeah.
And knowing that education piece. And so, history. Let's go through American history.
Yes,
for a
of
minute.
course.
Muslim contributions to American history. What can you tell us?
It starts from day one. Like the first enslaved people on this land, the first black people on this land were Muslim. Muslims helped build this country. Kunta Kinte, the story of Kunta Kinte is very well known. Kunta Kinte comes from Gambia. Like the town of Jufre is a stomping ground for all of us when we go back to Gambia to see where his village is, where his family was from, his mother Binta, the hut she was in, and like really understanding that Muslims really helped build this country from the early beginnings of this country's inception. Always been around, even though a lot of Muslims were forced out of Islam into Christianity, but the history is still there. Then you have the people like Malcolm X, who really fought for justice for all black Americans, not just Muslim black Americans, but all black Americans are Muslim. You have notable Muslims throughout the history of this country who have added to the activism, who have added to medicine, who have added to education. And throughout the history of the world, you're talking about math, algebra, algorithms. You're talking about some of the first schools in Cairo. You're talking about Muslims have had just numerous contributions to the world as a whole. And I think when we look at and kind of just put the spotlight on the 0.001% of Islam that may be violent or that may be attributed to negativity, I think then you miss the whole 99.99% that's really having a meaningful impact on this globe.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, I got to ask a question. How can non-Muslims help to embrace Ramadan?
Man, a good question. I think the first thing is not to ask, you can't even drink water?
Yeah.
I think that's a question I've gotten my whole life. I'm like, nah, I can't even drink water. I can't chew gum either. Just really understanding that your Muslim neighbors, they can't eat from sunrise to sunset, but it's really a month of really understanding that we all have blessings. The fact that I have the ability to break fast when it comes to turning 7 o'clock, that's a blessing. Like, I have food in my fridge. It's a month about really understanding and reflecting. There are people across the world that fasting, that's their norm.
Right.
They don't eat from sunrise to sunset because they don't have. They're not doing this as a religious practice.
Spirits, right.
No, it's not spiritual. It's like I legitimately cannot eat.
Right.
I need aid. I need food. So in the month of Ramadan, you can go to mosque and contribute with charity. All mosques are giving out iftar meals. Muslim Community Network ourselves, we are giving out iftar meals today at 97th Street Mosque, and we have some food distributions and food pantries across different areas of the city. And then also, like, we have Eid celebrations in April for the Muslim community. We're having one specifically in the Bronx at CES 55 with Principal Torres. But I think just really understanding and touching base with your Muslim neighbor and saying, where's your mosque? Do you guys need anything? Do you need cases of water? Do you need food during this Ramadan season so you could break iftar? How can we be of help? How can we make sure maybe we're playing our music too loud while you're fasting and that's something that you don't really listen to during Ramadan? Maybe we could lower our volume until after sunset, just as an accommodation, knowing that we are really neighbors. I think that's the ways we can be more inclusive.
Husein Yatabarry, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Man. I appreciate you coming.
Of course.
Gotta come back again, my brother.
I would definitely will invite me.
All right. You're invited, man. I already did that. Now we just got to work out a date.
All right.
We know who to talk to. All right.
All right.
We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this.